Hey, Nelson. Hi. Super good to have you on the podcast today. And I'm seriously wondering what got you interested in partnerships?
Well, it's kind of funny because I actually kind of like accidentally fell into it. So when I started my career, I actually was in a one-year training program at a tech company, and it was interviewing for five open positions across the US, and they were mainly for sales roles. But I actually didn't do well in those interviews and was ranked second to last in four of them. And the fifth one was related to partnerships. And for that interview, like I heavily prepped on the presentation, the assets, and the strategy, and actually got ranked second in the interview. But luckily, the person who got ranked first decided to do something else. So, funny enough, that's how I stumbled into the job of partnerships. Ended up relocating from North Carolina to the Bay Area to take on that job. And that's how it all started. But it's been basically almost an 18-year career in tech, doing primarily just partnerships, and it's been an incredible, fun journey, and I'm always happy to share like learnings along the way.
Perfect. But before we dive into learnings, let's please just briefly catch up on the main milestones. So, if I asked you what are three or five things that you are most proud of in your career, what would you answer? What were these huge moments in your career?
The first is building from 0 to 1. And the reason I say that one is it is so incredibly hard to try to look at something from the, very beginning and then craft the strategy to get it to not only success and partner market fit initially, but then to scale. So I've done that five times now at different companies. This is across companies like Box, Optimizely, Airtable, Miro, et cetera. And so that's something as an example that I'm very, very proud of. And then the second is this idea of having a principles first framework where basically instead of trying to bring over playbooks and tactics to a new company, it's really driven by first principles thinking to create the right partner strategy. And I had to learn that the hard way experientially and also through mentorship and from shadowing others and networking with other peers. But once I actually implemented that approach, I found an exponentially better outcome in terms of success. And that is something I'm really passionate to teach others, and why I, as an example, started Partner Principles.
Fantastic. And I'm eager to dive into that because it seems that you have literally algorithmatized your brains or something like that when it comes to that. But just like to double down, it's so important what you said about 0 to 1 because when you're starting out, nobody takes you seriously, right? If you're this startup with 200 people pitching to Google or Nike, you're like, haha, here is a link to our startup program. So I would love to dive into your partner principles. What are they?
The most important one, and the one I love to talk about with folks, is being really customer centric. So if you start there and you focus on really understanding their journey and deeply empathizing with them and understanding what it looks like from beginning to end in terms of getting to the business outcomes, what you're able to do is to really understand like what they're going through, what language are they using, what is having the biggest business impact to them that they care about. And what's so great about that, especially when you do that in qualitative interviews, is you get a really deep understanding, right? And then if you combine a qualitative set of customer interviews with the quantitative, you're able to have a really good view of your customer and truly understand your ICP. And what you can do from there is once you have all of that built out in that assessment phase, you can then more accurately understand which partner types are going to help your customer on that journey to the outcome. And by mapping those partner types and prioritizing around business impact, you're going to make better bets in your partner strategy with a higher chance of success. And that's where you can quickly test for partner market fit with higher probability. And that's because you've gone through that important assessment phase. And this is one of the most important things that often is not necessarily carried out by many folks who start out building a partner program. A lot of folks start thinking about talking to partners right away and like recruiting and onboarding. And what I always recommend is take a step back before you do that. Make sure you really understand the customer, get to know them, understand their pain, their language, and then go allocate the right partners to go solve for that.
Okay, that makes so much sense because, for example, if you are dealing with a product with complex onboarding and you just like see customers struggling with implementation, it would be more natural to have some sort of agency partners and implementation partners than, for example, to do and engage like 12,000 affiliates into sending people into broken onboarding. Now that you're saying it, it makes so much sense. But hey, I'm sure that you have a better example to share.
Yeah, that's accurate, right? Like if you have this great top of funnel through partners that you've basically built out, but the problem is the adoption and the usage by the customer, because let's say it's a more complex platform and they need help. Well, then you might get, 10,000 logos onboarded, but if a lot of them churn, it's not necessarily a healthy go-to-market motion. And so that's exactly it. And I think it's anchored around ultimately the customer, their journey, their pain, and what you're solving for that has the biggest business impact. And the key is, oftentimes what I hear people do is, hey, I want to bring this playbook from one company to another. And I always caution around that because sometimes you can do that and get lucky. But the key is, what I've seen is even when the companies look really incredibly similar, like literally the same type of technology platform in terms of like what the product does, it doesn't always mean that specific partner playbook will work at that other company that's similar. And I'll give you an example. It might be the same tech platform, but what if it's focused on different segments or verticals? That may change that entire partner go to market motion. So there's a lot of nuances, again, all anchored back to your customer and who they are and what their journey is and the pain they're going through.
Okay, fantastic. You really got me hyped, and we are only at principle number one. But yeah, now that you said it, it just makes so much sense because if you work with John from Kellogg's before and then switched industry, it's probably not the same type of partner that you would have. So, customer first, dearly noted. What's the second one?
My second one is something I'm very passionate about as well, which is winning hearts and minds. And I think when you're building a partner program from the beginning, a lot of folks want to get to systems and scale and like mechanisms. But what I always remind people is that it's a journey and there's a lot of change management. And one of the biggest things you can do is win hearts and minds before you get to, systems to scale. And what I mean by that is I'll give you an example. So let's say you're building out a set of partners like SIs that deliver services. And what you want to do is in that beginning, as you're winning your first few deals, you really want to evangelize it both internally and when allowed, of course, externally around things like the problem, the solution, and the outcome. And what you're doing is you're becoming a really great storyteller to get people bought into the vision of how partners drive success for your customers and for your company and for their own company as well. And if you do it really well, people buy in, right? Across the teams, whether it's sales or CSMs or SEs or, operations, et cetera. And what ends up happening is people then rally around that and they become advocates and champions for the partner strategy. And that is so important because that can get you things like resource allocation, more support cross-functionally, and so forth. And so I'm a really big believer in the 0 to 1 build in the early stages to go win the hearts and minds as a way to then get to systems and scale where you need resource allocation to be able to do that. That's the second big principle.
Fantastic. And I think that I have intelligent question for you. Finally. So the question would be if you have to engineer these success cases, right? Distraction from the partnership program. Is it safer to have like, okay, here are my top 5 or 10 bets and let's focus and make sure that we have a win there? Or would you still diversify? Would you still, okay, here are potential 200 partners, maybe one will work?
I think the answer is nuance, and it goes back to it depends on your customer, their journey, the pain they're going through, and how you're solving for that with the business impact. And so there is no silver bullet answer. It really depends on the company and their customers. What I can say is I've seen both work for different types of companies. And I think what's really key is you just want to make sure you're oriented around how to solve for that pain. So the answer is, again, I've seen it done both ways. And the way for you to actually implement a framework to go figure this out is when you have that assessment of your customer done and that clear ICP and their journey mapped out, what you then want to do is build your ideal partner profile. So for example, if you want to make a bet on technology partners that integrate into your platform, what you then want to look at is something that I call the 4 Cs. So this is capacity, capability, commitment, and customers. And I'll give you an example of this. So when you think about capacity, it might be like the number of employees they have, the size of their sales team, the number of services folks, the number of consultants. It might be their reach digitally, right, or regionally in location. It could be their customers in terms of by segment, the number of customers they have, revenue, vertical, are other ways to think about customer segmentation. And then you want to think about capabilities, like what capabilities do they bring to the table that unlock, for example, new workflows or ways to optimize for your customers, right? That could be complementary to your platform. What are proof points of success that you can reference, like different portfolios of customers that have asked for this integration and have actually implemented it and are using it on a monthly basis, on a daily basis, et cetera? Who are there other technology platforms that are similar to yours that they're already integrating with? What is their specific economic buyer alignment as well? And this one falls under actually the customer side, but the idea is, do they talk to the same economic buyers? And that one's actually really interesting because I've seen partnerships where you might get like a big brand or well-known name on board, but if they don't work with your users and your economic buyer, it may not work in the go-to-market motion because, while they might bring some type of capability, if they're not talking to the folks that you are, it's very hard potentially to get that off the ground. That's why the customer overlap on economic buyer, persona, vertical function segment is also really important. And the last C is commitment, which is really interesting because it's really hard to measure this initially from a data perspective, right? And what I mean by that is you can build out all this criteria about your partners. And let's say you have like 20 criteria on the things that I mentioned, but how do you measure commitment right off the bat? And the answer is you can't really, right? A lot of it is, as you start to work with each other, you start to see that commitment level. Do they have a champion assigned? Is there an executive sponsor? Do you have a cadence call? Are they allocating resources like MDF? Are they doing joint events together? Do they have an action plan with you on the partner side? Those are examples of signals that can then be, basically input from a data perspective to signal to you whether or not they're highly committed as a partner. So I call this the 4Cs framework as a part of the ideal partner profile. And I do have a slide for that that I give away to people that'll help them in that process as well.
And no
Happy to
worries,
share
we
that
will link it.
afterwards.
Yeah, I have it on my backlog already.
Awesome.
No, Nelson, this is so great. And it literally made me reflect on an instance that I had in the beginning of the year, because you know how it is, like I run a very small operation and I need partners when I'm entering foreign countries, right? So I just had a great experience in Spain. The company has like 200 people, everything is super well organized, and we work like, we say, Swiss knife or Swiss wheel or something like that, everything perfect. But in February, I was trying to develop a partnership for Dubai, and it was just chaos. I mean, attaching no names or something like that. But I do believe this is just like my assumption, and feel free to negotiate it the most you can. But it didn't pass the sniff test. So me and the guy were just like not vibing. So it was just like this awkwardness, this feeling of mistrust, something not aligned culturally or whatever was happening there. And I was like, could really be a good partnership, but it's like two dogs that don't like each other.
Well, I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to one, if you're very clear about how it helps the customer and what they're going through, and that you have that value alignment around being customer centric, I find that tends to make things a lot easier, even if it may not be the easiest person to work with and so forth. Because if you share that common value, it can help make everything a lot more crystal clear about the importance of what you're doing and why you would want to go execute against that. But I think this also comes down to potentially that fourth C that I mentioned around commitment, which is where if you don't see that commitment from a partner to go do what's necessary to get a partnership off the ground, it really is mutual, right? Both folks have to lean in and give to really make it truly successful. And that is often a good litmus test to determine if this partnership will take off over time. What's been very interesting about this too in my career is I've seen some partnerships literally take sometimes a year to truly get off the ground. And what I mean by that is it's so iterative, right? And it takes a lot of work. Like it's not realistic a lot of times to expect you recruit this strategic partner and within a month you've got all these deals close and you're off and running. That's not always the case. And especially I see this in the enterprise segment where things can be much slower moving on the many different facets. And so the key is you've really got to put in that work up front, stay consistent. You want both parties to be heavily committed in doing the work. And then if you do that over time, generally speaking, you should see success come from it. And if you don't, you certainly want to do the retro, understand where there's gaps or where things are not working. And if you find that it's absolutely not working at all, you can always hopefully walk away from that partnership based on your terms. But I think the key is also you want to be patient and do the right thing over and over again with consistency. And then eventually, over time, you tend to see the payoff if you've done the assessment correctly from the very beginning.
Well, that was such a wake-up call for me to absorb because I sometimes get a little bit dramatic and a little bit emotional, but it's very nice how you kind of brought it down to this common denominator, which is still rational. And just like the glue of this collaboration are just like shared goals. I think the trust is still very important one, but yeah, this is the fourth element that you were mentioning. But hey, is this 4C framework part of your partner principles, or did we take a little bit of a side road?
Yeah, it is. I wouldn't necessarily say it's IPP in itself is a principle. It's more of a template to help people understand what types of partners and criteria they should be thinking about as they prioritize their partner list. So it's very helpful for that. But it does come back to the principle of ensuring that you have prioritization to be able to do proper focus and resource allocation on your side to ensure that you are then driving the right things for the customer to get them to the outcome. So I would tie it back to that in terms of a principle.
Fantastic. So the third principle is prioritization, and just
Yeah, and effectively, the prioritization basically ties back to the Pareto principle in the sense that, generally speaking, what I've seen across many different partners, this is literally over 1,700 partners that I've worked with,
wow.
is the Pareto principle will generally apply. So really, typically, it's in the range of roughly 20% of your top partners will really produce the vast majority of the results. And so that ties back to what I mentioned earlier about prioritization and ensuring that you're focused on the right ones that drive the right outcomes.
Fantastic. How do you know which are the right ones?
That's a great question. And then what I think you do there is you ensure that you measure against goals that are very data driven that show that you're successful with that specific partner type. And it can vary across the partner type as well. So as an example, as you work with resellers, it might be something like source and then influence or fulfilled revenue, depending on how you define it. Many companies have different terms specific to their sales go-to-market motion. If you're working with services partners, right, it might be tied to what percentage of your deals are attached with services partners, and that is an indicator of your customers are adopting the services to go deploy the solution, as an example. And then another one could be with technology partners. It would relate to potentially the adoption of the integration to show that people are actually using it and getting value out of it. That could be weekly active users, daily active users, monthly active users, etc. Could be the number of integrations that are actually turned on and basically activated. So those are just some examples of how you might measure success specifically with those different partner types. I do have a slide for that as well if folks are interested.
You have a slide for everything, but it makes so much
Yeah, definitely.
sense because it's just like this single source of truth, right? So after you go and value if this makes sense or not, you are both looking at the same number. And what is cooler about this is that you can compare it with other go-to-market motions, right? So you see, those partnership leads convert twice as well as some other leads. Maybe I should invest more into these ones. That's really cool.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's something I highly recommend in the assessment process. It's also, there's a slide for this as well. It's doing cohort analysis is incredibly important, right? And typically it's not in the very beginning. It's usually towards after you collect some data with your partner types, of course. And there's nuances, which I can explain later if you want to go into it. But the key is you're able to show this is what it's like without partners in terms of, time to close, average deal size, the ARR growth over the life of the customer. It could be net retention, it could be gross retention, right? All those types of metrics. And then you could look at it basically side by side and then it'll show you the impact of what the partner does when they're involved. And that can be a very powerful business case for why to involve partners into your customer opportunities and lifecycle.
Perfect. Oh, did we just go through principle number 3, prioritization? What else do we have?
The other big one that I really am passionate about as well is the importance of communication and consistency. Right? And this is like really, really important because sometimes I think we think on the partnership side, like, hey, if we just communicate once to our partners, they'll pick it up and run with it. And or internally, right? Like I want to tell the cross-functional folks about this case study with our partners, and once they hear that case study, we're off and running. And what I find is that can be true if you do a really good job. Like you might see an initial spike. But what's really important to sustaining something that will be successful for the long term is you really need consistent communication, and you want to be very specific about the format so it's easy to contextualize. So what I mean by that is, let's just say you're communicating about a case study to win hearts and minds, or like I mentioned earlier. You don't want to build like 5 different variations of it because contextually that's very hard, right? Like it's like when someone sees case study 1 versus number 5 and they're totally different formats, it can throw people off. So the key is keep it really simple, keep it consistent, and stay on message. And what'll happen is if you do that over time, you generally find long-term success, and people start to buy in and see. They don't feel like it's a one-time thing that may have been lucky, or hey, that's a one-off. It is something that is consistently going on and is now part of the DNA with your company as well.
Yeah, let's double one on this one because it's incredibly important. Partners should be treated as customers if they are like big potential partners. And I don't know what are the processes. Maybe you want to dive into this further, but I see now that we should have like a CRM for partners and maybe a newsletter for partners and a little bit of a standard tooling such as partner deck or something like that. How do you make sure that you are consistent? Do you send them all a newsletter once a quarter or?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do this. And so the way I would frame it is I'll give you my tactical playbook on it, but I think stepping back from the playbook, one thing to think about is what are the right communication channels to drive that consistent, open conversation with your partners in a way that is effective, that meets them where they are in the journey. And what I mean by that is you can have all these different types of comms channels, right? It could be email, and it could be one-on-one. It could be email via newsletter. It could be a Slack group that you set up for your partners. But I'll give you an example where they may not work, right? Like if you're working with partners that are not allowed to use Slack as an example, then it's not meeting them where they are in the journey, right? That's an example. So that's why it's always key to have that principle in the back of your mind, which is meeting partners where they are in the journey on the comm side. But it could, like I mentioned, it could be community based, like within a Slack channel. It could be one-on-one within Slack. It could be within your PRM. So in your PRM, you can make an announcements there. You can have resources for them there as well to be enabled or to be able to do marketing or sales, etc. It could be within your LMS. And the key is you've got all these different channels for communication that help the partner on different parts of their journey. And the key is, again, to maintain a really high quality bar as they go through that journey, and to be consistent on the messaging and the comms so that, again, they understand what good looks like and they want to adhere to that high quality bar. And ultimately what you get is the partner who is much more now successful because of that. And you basically have said at the very beginning, hey, this is what good looks like. Let's work towards that together. And you constantly communicate that. So those are some examples.
This is super cool. What would you do in the event that they are not performing? Would you just say, hey, I saw that your sales is lagging behind this quarter. How could I help? Or like, how do you handle this situation when you see that something is off? Almost a resurrection email, if you will.
Setting the expectation in advance is always really helpful, because if you are building that plan with them together, you're both in the same boat together. And you agree that this is what you want to go do to drive success mutually. And so everyone is part of that process of creating that outcome together. So you get the buy-in. And then the key is having that cadence to ensure that you're actually executing against the plan and getting to the outcomes. And so that can be things like a biweekly call or combined with like QBRs as an example. And that allows you to then have the open conversation together about how are we collectively doing towards getting to the outcome. Because again, a partnership is two parties coming together to go drive it. It's not just on the partner. It is also on the vendor or technology company to go drive success with them. It's a two-way street. And in fact, I would make the argument that it's actually more important for the technology company and the vendor to give first to help that partner be successful. This is very important. A lot of folks tend to go to partners and say like, hey, welcome to the partner program. Can you give me 100 leads? And we're going to measure this every quarter. And to me, a partnership is so much easier and better when you lead by example and say, hey, there are these opportunities I will work with you on. I will go help you build a great business. I will show you how to be profitable and successful in this go-to-market motion. I will give first without asking for anything to start other than to help solve our customers' problems. And as we do that, you will see how amazing this is, and you will want to invest back and then reciprocate over time. This is called the flywheel effect. And what you've seen is over and over again, partners that go to the ecosystem with this mindset and strategy perform incredibly well because they're basically seeding the partner ecosystem with success. The partners are successful, they invest back, and then ultimately they grow together very successfully from there.
I think I will buy your course on partnerships because the way how you explain it, I mean, it makes so much sense and it seems that you have everything covered, right? When it comes to partnerships, I don't know, maybe I have a stereotype or something like that, but it seems to be for the well-connected folks that have gone to school with the right type of people, but the way you are presenting it, it's really like scientific and it makes total sense. And I just see myself doing a much better job if I would implement these principles, not be like so natural about this.
So I've done it without principles before, and I have found you can kind of like brute force it with tactics and still be potentially successful. But long term, it's very hard to sustain. And so I've learned that the hard way. And what I would say is if you really have first principles thinking around partner strategy, you are definitely setting yourself up for long-term success. And I'll give you an example of that. Like one other big principle I have is having like really clear swim lanes with partners to understand what they're going after versus what you might be, right? And as an example, that could be segments. So you might say like, hey, we don't want to pursue with a high touch sales model like the SMB space, but partners would be fantastic for that because they have a lot of local presence. They have a lot of staff to go manage that. They can scale it out for us in terms of the high touch sale, and that might be an example of like a very clear swim lane. When you are very clear about where to engage and where it's, where it's like very, 0 or 1, right? Like ultimately it's this or that, right? And when you're very clear on that, and for example, in that SMB segment, you might be 100% partners, it just makes it so easy for that partner to say, hey, I want to invest with you because I know you're all in with me within this segment, right? So that's why swim lanes are hypercritical. And I also have a slide for that if anyone needs help on that. That's a very common strategy principle to be thinking about.
Yeah, perfect. And it addresses one of the underlying concern, which is, will this go-to-market motion cannibalize my own efforts, or will they eat a part of my market and scarcity things like this? So it's very, very, very good to have these swim lanes defined and just like make decisions for the partner acquisition as well, right? So if I'm grinding, I don't know, German market, very detailed, then maybe it would be too good to have a partner in France or something like that, because I cannot do everything and we wouldn't cannibalize each other, or it would be like minimal. I don't know, when it comes to partnerships, and since you are working with like thousands of companies on that, what other concerns do people have when it comes to partnerships? I mean, it sounds so cool that when you are describing it, why is not everybody doing this?
Why is everyone not doing this? It depends. What I would say is what I've seen is sometimes they might have tried it, and then because it wasn't oriented around first principles, it may have been built out very reactively. And what I mean by that is, a company may get 6, 7 different partner types saying, hey, I want to partner with you. And they try all of them at once and they're not focused. As you can imagine, that can lead to very challenging outcomes. Just purely because if you're not focused, like if you try to do too much, you're probably not going to do any one of those really well typically, especially if you're resource constrained. Now, if you have a ton of resources, that might be different, but that's like a very common one that I've seen. Another could be simply that companies haven't started doing it yet, and it could be because of the lack of enablement around partner strategy. It could be just simply the uncertainty about what it might look like. That can be a common reason very early on with companies as well. So yeah, I've seen varying reasons. Those are probably the two that are the most common that come to mind that I've seen.
Super interesting. Okay, so we went through principle number 4 now. What else do we have?
Yeah, let's know about principles because I've shared quite a few of those. But I would just really say, I think the one thing I want to stress is this is more on the personal side.
Mhm.
The reason I do this is because I've done partnerships for almost 18 years, and to be fair, one of those years was around leading field marketing for a company. But why I'm so passionate about this is I personally have gone through the process of having to build partner strategy from 0 to 1 a lot. And I know how hard it can be. Like late nights, weekends, crafting a strategy deck, trying to build the perfect slide, trying to think through what are the principles that this partner strategy should orient around. And then downstream of that, what are the frameworks that I should go build out to go implement against those principles to get to the outcome? And then what am I measuring for success? And what does the team look like? And what does resourcing look like? And so forth. And it's a huge mental lift. And then it just takes a lot of work to be able to go do that. And what I'm passionate about is helping people along the way because, one of the reasons I was able to get where I am today in my career is because a lot of people were mentors to me who helped lift me up personally. And I'd love to be able to do that for the partnership leaders community at scale. That's something I think a lot about, where to be able to help save someone 80 to 100 hours of like having to think all through all these challenges that I went through and instead get them to success faster is something that I'm really, really passionate about. So this is a big driving reason behind why I started Partner Principles and why I want to teach this to the world to be able to help the folks that do this improve and not have to go through the pain that I went through in years past.
Yeah, that's literally incredible. I have like 2 more questions. You touched upon this subject, I think 3 or 4 times already. So, types of partnerships. What are types of partnerships according to Nelson Wang?
I have a slide for this as well, so happy to share this with all the folks out there. And what I say is it really depends on your company, right? Because as you go from company to company, depending on what industry it's in, and what segments it covers, et cetera, you might have different partner types. The most common ones that I typically see are, and this is more specific to the tech companies, but one is technology partners or ISVs. And these are companies that integrate to your platform and unlock new workflows typically. The second is resellers, distributors, where basically they resell to either the reseller in the case of a distributor or to the customer, and they make money on the markup from their price. And that's the second most common type I've seen. The third is solution partners or SIs. They are basically companies that provide professional services to the customer to get them to the outcome. Think, development, integration work, et cetera. There's a wide ranging amount of services that can be offered. Those are just 2 small examples. Another one is marketplaces. The hyperscalers like Microsoft, Google, AWS Marketplace, et cetera, that basically help with financial incentives, the transaction process, and the go-to-market motion is another one. Another big one is affiliate partners, and then also referral partners as well. You also see in the marketing world quite often like agencies that will typically kind of fall into that services partners category, and sometimes also referral as an example. Actually, in some cases, I've actually seen reseller as well. So you'll notice that at the end of the day, based on the company you're at and the customer journey, you'll have different partner types. And also, what's interesting is the naming conventions. Even though the definition is technically pretty much the same, the naming conventions might change based on that specific industry. So that's what I found interesting in my experience, having worked across different platforms as well. So wanted to share that.
Fantastic. So before we wrap it up, just one story. Just one story of a company that you work with that achieve incredible results with partnerships. Inspire us, please.
Yeah. So I'm very, very proud of the Airtable partner program and having basically built it close to ground up. What's been exciting is we have the suite of services partners that are just incredible at the work they do. And what they're great at is meeting with our customers, understanding their journey and the pain that they're going through. And then they will basically showcase to them the services that they can do with proof points, and that gives the customer a lot of confidence to work with our services partners. So there's an amazing set of folks out there that I've been working with over the last year and call it 10 months now that have just done an incredible job in delivering customer outcomes. And specifically, that is a partner program that I'm so proud of. And it's been such a joy to work with those partners as well.
Congratulations. Last but not least, what's the best way to continue this conversation? So you know that I'm a very huge fan of your newsletter, and where else can audience just like learn more about you and your wonderful science?
Yeah, absolutely. So my passion project is partnerprinciples.com. There's a bunch of free templates you can leverage there to help on your partner strategy. And then there's a newsletter that you can sign up to as well. We're fast approaching close to 5,500 subscribers now. We're just under that.
Wow.
But certainly would love to have you join that journey. I started writing, I believe, I think it was like 10 months ago. I'll have to double check the time frame. But basically, it's been an incredible journey and so fun to do that. So excited to share more learnings there.
Fantastic. Okay, so we'll definitely go to partnerprinciples.com. Then, just like from my side, I was searching for somebody intelligent to talk about a partnership for quite some time, and I'm really grateful for your science because oftentimes when we talked about partnerships, things get like super intangible and like you should have a CRM. Here is an outbound sequence. How do you acquire partners? But I love it how you brought everything together in a system that is actually actionable, tested, and makes sense. So thank you so much for your intellectual contribution to the go-to-market discussion.
I'm so happy to do that. Yeah, and I would say even to this day, I still reference my own templates. So I can
Well
promise you
said.
it's really helpful. And yeah, obviously thousands of other people have leveraged it as well. So hopefully it helps everyone out.
Yeah. Okay, so fantastic. Thank you so much for listening to this episode and just double down on partnerships. I mean, it is still one of the most undervalued go to market motions. And I hope that my conversation today with Nelson Wang inspired you to take it for a spin. Take care and see you next time. Ciao.